The rain came like a whisper, soft, insistent, and oddly warm against her skin as the private boat cut through the dark waters of the Pacific. Elena Bishop stood at the helm, drenched in sea mist and uncertainty. The invitation had been clear: a week of absolute escape on Elaris Isle, an ultra-exclusive resort veiled in secrecy, shrouded in luxury, and owned by a man who was more myth than mogul. Damien Virell, a name spoken in hushed tones, a ghost who made fortunes in oil, arms, and art, and who hadn't been photographed in over a decade. People said he had vanished. Others claimed he'd built an empire of shadows, trading in desire, secrets, and silence. Now, Elena, an investigative writer with a hidden motive, had received a personal invitation. No press, no public agenda, just her name, a black card, and a chartered path to the island. The sky cracked with distant thunder as the silhouette of the island emerged. Jagged cliffs rose from the sea like ancient gods, torchlight flickering at the shoreline as if welcoming her into another world. She felt the shift immediately. This was not a place of relaxation. It was a domain, and she had just entered it. The resort was unlike anything she had imagined. No check-in desk, no staff in uniforms, just a wide, marble path lined with silent men in tailored black, leading her to a single waiting car. The scent of white gardenias lingered in the air, unnatural in the humid night. She was guided without words, her luggage already gone, replaced by a velvet box handed in her lap. Inside, a silk keycard, a delicate silver bracelet, and a note in crisp calligraphy. Elaris exists for those who seek freedom behind a mask. Your mask is midnight. Wear it when you are ready. DV. Elena frowned, masked. Before she could ask, the car had already begun to climb the serpentine hill toward her private villa, perched alone at the highest point of the island. From there, the view devoured the ocean, the resort invisible beneath a jungle of shadows and moonlight. The villa was a dream spun in obsidian and velvet. Glass walls, a sunken pool that glowed from beneath, a bedroom with a bed so vast it looked untouched by humanity. Everything whispered money, more than she'd ever seen. But it wasn't the wealth that unsettled her. It was the silence. There were no clocks, no phones, no staff, only a tall wine bottle waiting beside a single glass and another note. You're not here to be found. You are here to be unmade. Let go, and the island will take you further. Tomorrow, sunset, where the bracelet, there was no signature, but somehow she felt watched. Not by cameras, by someone who already knew the shape of her every secret. The first night passed in strange quiet. Elena bathed in the dim blue glow of the pool, her thoughts spiraling. This was meant to be her cover. A vacation that would let her infiltrate and expose the island's true purpose. Rumors of indulgent games, mass patrons, and dangerous freedom. But no one had offered her anything. No forbidden parties. No hedonistic welcome. Only a silence that felt like invitation. By morning, the island revealed its seduction in subtle ways. Her clothes were replaced by finer ones. Whisper-soft fabrics, delicate sandals, and silk robes. The bracelet she'd worn, the one she thought decorative, now shimmered with an embedded code. When she wandered, no one stopped her, but everyone watched. Gardeners with quiet eyes, spa attendants who vanished before she could ask a question. She felt like she was being tested. The island was waiting to see who she would choose to become. That evening, she descended toward the central lounge, a vast open-air chamber carved into the cliff overlooking the sea. A live quartet played something haunting and slow. Guests, dozens of them, moved like whispers between shadows. Every one of them masked, Venetian, elegant, eerie. When she arrived, her mask had already been placed at the table. Midnight black as promised. She felt the shift as soon as she put it on. The world blurred. Inhibition left, and a pair of eyes found her instantly. From across the room, seated on a high-back chair that overlooked the sea, a man watched her. No mask. His presence was quiet thunder. Tall, dressed in black on black, a single silver ring on his index finger. He did not smile. He did not gesture. But when she looked at him, she knew. Damien Virell, and she'd been summoned. The lounge emptied as if by unseen cue. Elena approached him slowly, every step echoing on the marble. She didn't speak, neither did he. He didn't need to. His eyes, gray, cold, ancient, took her in as though she were something he'd known already. Not just her name, her angles, her mind, her fears, and something else she hadn't expected, her hunger. She sat without invitation. He poured her a glass of wine, amber, strange, expensive. He watched her sip. Only then did he speak. "You're not here to escape," Damien said, voice low and precise. "You're here to be undone. Let me show you how." He did not move to touch her, not in the way Elena had expected. There were no casual grazes, no dominant claims of the wrist or waist. Damien Virell didn't need to touch her to invade her. He touched with silence, with certainty, with a gaze that flicked over her lips and then lingered, like he was watching them burn. And Elena was letting him. Even now, sitting across from him in a chair carved from dark wood and silver inlay, the mask still clinging to her face, her breathing shallow from the intensity of his presence. She was letting herself play this game. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the bracelet on her wrist, subtly warm to the touch now, as if sinking to her pulse. Or maybe it was because she had never been seen like this before, stripped without removal, watched without being touched. "You're not a tourist," Damien said, his voice dipping low, textured with smoke and something nearly amused. Elena tilted her head. "No, you're a seeker." She took another sip, daring him with her silence. "You came here thinking you'd uncover something." His gaze flicked once to the silver band on her wrist. But the island doesn't give away its secrets. It trades them, yours for its own. Elena met his stare. "And what do you want to trade?" Damien leaned forward slightly, just enough to let the moonlight cut across his cheekbones, the edge of his throat, the line of his mouth that never quite smiled. "Everything you're pretending not to crave." She left the lounge that night altered, not by experience, but by an absence. No one had laid a hand on her. No one had whispered scandalous invitations or led her to forbidden doors. And yet her skin felt warm in places untouched, as though she'd been read by fire. The mask had done something. Not to how others saw her, but to how she allowed herself to exist. Unfiltered, unknown, unashamed. She had been watched by the most powerful man on the island. And instead of feeling fear, she had felt seen. That night, in her villa, she dreamt in color. Fingers that never touched her, yet traced lines down her spine. Words spoken not in conversation, but in command. A voice she didn't recognize in herself whispering, "Yes, take it." The bracelet began to respond. She noticed it the next day as she walked barefoot along a path of white stones leading to the central garden. The moment her thoughts turned to him, Damien, the bracelet warmed. Pulsed, not in light, but in sensation, like it was breathing with her. And others began to notice her, too. Masked guests would pass her, some offering nods, others lingering. No one spoke, but a few reached for her hand, brushing the silver band, as if recognizing something newly awakened. She passed one room, open air, perfumed with jasmine, and saw a woman standing perfectly still before a mirror. Her back bare, the mask on her face golden and elaborate, her skin illuminated by candlelight. Behind her, a man watched, unmoving, his hands behind his back. Not touching, just watching, and the woman trembled in place. There was no moaning, no whispering, no overt act. Yet Elena could feel the tension ripple off them like heat from a flame. This place was not about indulgence. It was about control, about being seen, and letting yourself be unraveled in return. By the time she returned to her villa that afternoon, another note was waiting. Tonight, the atrium beneath the cliff. No musk, just you. The bracelet will guide you. She held the card for a long time, the edges warm from her hand. No musk. The invitation was clear. Damien didn't want the version of her she had pretended to be. He wanted the one she was hiding even from herself. And the bracelet pulsed once, stronger than before. The atrium was carved directly into the base of the cliff. Stone arches held up a domed ceiling of black glass. Beneath it, hundreds of candles flickered across shallow pools, casting trembling light against polished obsidian floors. There were no attendants, no music, just the sound of distant surf and the rhythm of her breathing. He was already there, standing with his back to her, a silhouette framed in stone and firelight. Elena didn't announce herself. She stepped onto the glass floor barefoot, the cool surface slick beneath her soles. Her heart was too loud in her chest, her blood too warm. He turned. His eyes roamed her, slowly, from her throat to her bare arms to the silver band she now wore like a brand. The air between them tightened. Damien stepped forward. She expected words, another line, a test, but instead, he raised his hand and touched her face. Just one finger trailing down her cheek, and something broke open inside her. It wasn't the touch itself. It was what it unlocked. She moved without thinking, closer, reckless. Her hand curled into his shirt front, her breath caught in her throat. Their mouths inches apart, her eyes wide, daring him, inviting him, and he leaned in, voice a whisper at her mouth. If you wanted to stop, say it now. Elena didn't speak. She kissed him instead. But even now, even in the moment of surrender, Damien didn't deepen the kiss. He held her face, letting her take the lead, letting her burn herself against him like paper to a match. And only when she pulled away, breathless, dizzy, did he say, "You've tasted it now, but that's not what you truly want." That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. He had touched her, kissed her, but he had stopped, held back, let her climb the edge of her own need, and then watch her try to manage it. He was in control, and that was what made her want him more. In her dreams, she was no longer hiding behind purpose or pretense. She wasn't the journalist, the spy, the woman with a plan. She was the version of herself that whispered please without knowing why. The next day changed everything. When she awoke, the bracelet had transformed. The silver now shimmered with a faint pulse of light, reacting to her skin like a second heartbeat. When she looked in the mirror, something was different. Not in her body, but in her eyes. She was no longer playing a role. She was being drawn into a place of truth, her own and his. That morning, a white dress had been laid out for her. Silk, backless, flowing. Beside it, a pair of black gloves, elbow length. And one final note. Tonight, the true invitation begins. Come without fear. DV. She held the card in her hands until the ink warmed from her pulse. And then she dressed. The dress clung like a second skin. Soft as water, weightless, whisper-thin silk that moved as though it had memory. Of the shape of her. The black gloves balanced the look like punctuation, elegance wrapped around something hidden, restrained. When Elena stepped outside her villa, the bracelet vibrated once, a subtle pulse on her wrist. Not painful, not electric, just awake. She didn't know how she knew the way. The bracelet didn't guide her with light or sound. It seemed to tug at her steps like intuition sharpened by obsession. Every turn through the jungle-draped paths, every hidden door, every flicker of a torch down below, she knew where to go. The path ended at a door, carved directly into the base of a cliff. It was old, weather-worn, no attendants, no symbols, and it opened for her. The room was dark, no candles this time, no music, just the sound of water trickling down stone walls and the low hum of silence pressing at the edges of her thoughts. Damien stood near the far wall, not facing her. This room was different, intimate, personal. It wasn't a designed fantasy like the others. It was raw. A wide glass window overlooked the ocean, black waves rolling like breath. On the floor, a thick velvet rug, a single chair, and above it, a mirror angled down. Elena entered without hesitation. She had passed some invisible threshold. She wasn't here to play a part anymore. She was here to be unwritten. Damien finally turned. No suit, just black slacks, bare arms, the collar of his shirt unbuttoned. His presence filled the space before he ever touched her. He didn't offer a greeting, didn't ask if she was ready. Instead, he raised one hand and pointed to the chair. Seat. The word wasn't spoken, but she heard it all the same. Elena moved deliberately, without breaking eye contact, and lowered herself into the chair. She waited for his voice, or his touch, or the next unspoken command. But all Damien did was reach behind her and adjust the angle of the mirror. Now, she was looking up at herself. She saw the bare curve of her shoulders, the way the white dress slipped down her frame, the black gloves like sin wrapped in silk, and most of all, her own face. Wide-eyed, flushed, wanting. "Tell me who you are," Damien finally said. "Elena Brinkit. You already know." "No," he replied. "I know you resume. Your awards, the masks you wear to pass through polite society." He stepped closer. "I want the one you never show. The one who dreams in fire." She swallowed. "And what if she doesn't exist?" Damien tilted his head. "She does. I've heard her breathing." What followed was not physical. It was worse. He asked questions. Not ordinary ones. Not easy ones. Questions that pulled at the stitches she had used to hold herself together for years. Why do you write about power, but run from your own? Whose voice do you silence in the dark? If no one could judge you, what would you ask for? Each one left her more undone than any caress. It was the first time anyone had made her speak her truths aloud. Not the kind found in columns or interviews, but the ones locked behind shame, pride, and fear. And as she answered, the mirror stopped reflecting a composed woman. It showed her raw, real, and the way Damien looked at her then, not with lust, but with reverence, as if he had just uncovered something holy in her ruins. He didn't kiss her this time, didn't strip her or demand anything. Instead, he knelt in front of her, the most powerful man on the island, on his knees, sliding off her glove one finger at a time, as though peeling away a part of her armor. His hands were warm, rougher than expected, not from softness, but from control. He pressed his lips to her wrist, not in seduction, in vow. "You're not mine yet," Damien said softly, "but you're no longer yours either." Then he stood and left her in the chair, alone, unraveled, and breathing like she'd just escaped drowning. She didn't leave the room for hours. The mirror kept staring, and in it, Elena no longer saw a guest on assignment. She saw someone who'd surrendered something unspoken, something she hadn't meant to give, but now that it was gone, she didn't want it back. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on her bed in the villa, windows wide to the ocean, fingers curled around the silver bracelet, now humming against her skin like it shared her thoughts. Every breath felt deeper, every inch of her body more awake. She didn't touch herself. She didn't need to. The memory of his voice had already undone her. The days blurred and deepened. Each evening brought a new encounter, each more intimate in ways that had nothing to do with skin and everything to do with power. One night, he made her walk blindfolded through a candlelit corridor, her steps guided only by the sound of his voice. Another, she was told to wait in a room for hours, doing nothing, until he arrived. He said nothing when he did. He simply sat across from her, and they stared at each other in silence. But it wasn't empty silence. It was electric. Anticipation as art. Control as courtship. By the time he finally touched her cheek again, she was trembling, not from fear, but from the precision of his restraint. And then he disappeared. 3 days. No message. No bracelet pulse. No invitations. The island grew colder in his absence, and Elena felt the loss like withdrawal. She wandered the paths alone, ignored by guests who once greeted her with nods. The staff became invisible again. The silence grew thick, and then, on the 4th night, there was a letter under her pillow. "You passed the test. You waited. You didn't chase. Now I'll show you what the island keeps hidden. Midnight. Come to the North Gallery. Unmasked. No gloves. Border. No questions. Only truths. Divi." She dressed in the simplest thing she owned. A black slip. Bare feet. No uedi. No pretense. The night air was cooler now, the path winding longer, the ocean louder, angrier, as though knowing what was about to be unearthed. The North Gallery wasn't marked, but she found it. Of course she did. The door opened with a groan, and the room was filled with paintings. Dozens of them. Portraits, all of women, some masked, some weeping, some arched in ecstasy, some staring directly out at the viewer, eyes defiant, lips parted in defiance or desire. And in the center of the room, a painting of her, unfinished. She stood in profile, mask dangling from one hand, the other hand to her mouth as if stifling a secret. The brushstrokes were recent. Bet, the likeness was haunting. "You were watching me," she whispered. "No," Damien said behind her. "I was seeing you." He stepped beside her, not touching, but the air between them bristled with the weight of everything unsaid. She turned to him, eyes searching, breath held, and for the first time, he kissed her. Not like a test, not like a promise, but like a claiming. And the moment their mouths met, the bracelet on her wrist flashed hot. The gallery lights dimmed, and the island, at last, exhaled. The kiss should have ended everything, should have broken the tension, released the coiled string between them, delivered the promise that had simmered since the moment they met. But it didn't. It only deepened it, because Damien Virell didn't kiss like a man indulging a fantasy. He kissed like a man waking up. His hand cradled her face, thumb against her jaw, not rough but exact. His mouth moved slowly against hers, without rush or hunger, just presence. The taste of him was wine dark and strange, like smoke, like control, like danger served from a crystal decanter. And when he pulled away, Elena felt it everywhere. Her knees, her ribs, the hollow under her breastbone. She blinked. Why now? He looked at her, eyes unreadable. Because now, you'll feel the difference between being wanted and being owned. She thought she understood what that meant. But she didn't. Not yet. Not until the next morning, when the bracelet pulsed hot against her skin and another note arrived, this time sealed in black wax. "You're ready. You've crossed the veil. The next 3 days are mine. You'll have no memory of what happens. You'll wake up different. Say no now, and the gate closes forever. But if you say yes, step through the garden arch at dusk. Alone, unquestioning. Divi." Elena sat on the edge of her bed, fingers trembling. No memory? 3 days lost. She was a writer, a woman of reason. She didn't do blind surrender, except she wanted to. Not for the fantasy, not for the thrill, but because every part of her that had ever been guarded, cautious, or composed now whispered yes. Because this wasn't about giving herself to a man. It was about meeting the version of herself who didn't need to be in control anymore. She stepped through the arch. The sun had just begun to die over the sea, bleeding gold through the trees. As she crossed the threshold, the bracelet flared, not with light, but with heat. Something shifted in the air. A scent, jasmine, salt, and spice. The whisper of silk. The closing of a door she hadn't seen. And then nothing. She woke up 3 days later, naked, wrapped in a white sheet on a bed that wasn't hers. Her limbs heavy, her lips parted as though she'd been whispering secrets in her sleep. The bracelet was gone. In its place, a slender black ribbon tied around her wrist. She rose slowly, her muscles warm and aching. Not from pain, from use. The villa around her was darker, not in color, in energy. The windows had been shaded, the mirrors covered, and a single dress hung on the wall. Red silk, low cut, midnight length, like something worn in dreams. No note this time, only a small line etched into the wall beside the mirror. "Now you're mine." When she left the villa, the island had changed. People bowed their heads as she passed. Staff stepped aside. Guests stared with open awe or fear. She had crossed something unseen. No longer a visitor, no longer a guest. Now, she was part of the island. And everyone knew. When she returned to the gallery that night, Damien was waiting beside the painting. It had been completed. Her mouth no longer hid a secret. It told one. Her eyes no longer looked away. They dared. He turned to her, slow, deliberate, eyes sweeping her form as though verifying the final stroke of a masterpiece. He didn't speak, didn't touch. He simply stepped back, once, and gestured to the center of the room, to a single, low velvet platform, framed in shadow. Elena didn't hesitate. She stepped up onto the platform, heart a low drumbeat, lips parted, arms at her sides. And she knelt, on her own, uncommanded, uncoerced, because now she understood. This wasn't submission, it was ascension. "You've returned changed," Damien said, voice almost reverent. "I don't remember anything," she whispered. He stepped closer. "You don't need to. Your body does." She looked up at him, voice barely a breath. "What did you do to me?" Damien crouched before her, hands resting on his knees, face level with hers. "I didn't do anything. I showed you what you were willing to do." The next few nights passed like fever. She was no longer a guest in the usual sense. She didn't attend the masked evenings, didn't walk among the others. Her place was beside Damien or behind him, always silent, always bare. She didn't feel small. She felt seen, and the island reacted. Doors opened for her without sound. Lights dimmed where she passed. She could feel the power now, the island breathing with her as though bonded. She no longer wore masks. She was the mask. And then came the revelation. On the 7th night, Damien led her down a path no one had ever taken, through a gate carved in iron and bone, to a locked chamber beneath the sea. Inside, there were tapestries, glass cases, artifacts, and a pedestal with a single book, not bound in paper, but in skin. Elena stared. "What is this?" she asked. Damien stepped beside her. "Every guest who comes to Elaris leaves a piece of themselves here. Not memories, not photos, something deeper." She touched the book, felt it pulse. Then she saw something impossible. Herself, etched into one of the pages. Eyes closed, lips open, a sketch that breathed. Her name below it, her real name, a name she hadn't used since childhood. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Damien said. "You gave it to me." During the 3 days, the realization hit like fire in her lungs. She had given him everything, not her body. That was the least of it. She had given him the parts of herself she didn't show anyone. The pain, the dreams, the rage, the ache. And he had held it, not to break her, but to reflect it back. Transformed. That night, he asked her a single question. Not a demand, not a command, a gift. "Do you want to leave?" Elena stared at him, the ocean black behind his silhouette. She thought of the life she had before, the voice she used in public, the cold beds, the safe articles, the empty applause. And then she looked at him, at what she'd become. She stepped forward, took his hand. No, she didn't ask what would happen next. Elena had long since stopped needing explanations. The woman who arrived on the island with motives tucked beneath polite smiles had shed her questions like old skin. Now, her understanding was visceral, wordless, carried not in logic, but in blood and breath. Damien didn't speak either. After she said no, that she didn't want to leave, he didn't reward her. He didn't smile. There was no soft piano music playing in the distance, no romantic exhale. There was only silence. And then his hand, still clasped in hers, tightened ever so slightly. Not possession, not protection, claim. That night was not marked by intimacy, not in the way the outside world defined it. No soft sheets or whispered confessions. Instead, he took her to the center of the island, an amphitheater carved into the jungle itself, vines crawling over stone, torches blazing in iron sconces. In the center, a circle marked in obsidian. And beyond that, the other guests, all masked again, dozens of them, watching in silence, not as voyeurs, as witnesses. "You're being initiated," Damien said, his voice a murmur at her back. "Into what?" He stepped in front of her and finally smiled. "Into yourself." She was told to kneel, but this time she didn't need the command. She dropped without hesitation, her knees touching cold stone, her breath steady. Her arms hung at her sides, palms open. Above her, the torches flickered wildly. The flames leaned toward her like they, too, had been summoned. Damien stood before her, tall, unmasked, a figure as old as the mythos of the island. "This place is not a resort," he said to the gathered audience. "It is a threshold, a house of mirrors that reflect only the things you deny." He gestured to Elena. "She came here, chasing a secret. She leaves bearing none." He offered her something wrapped in black silk, a new bracelet, not silver like the last. This one was gold, etched in sigils, delicate and heavy. As he tied it around her wrist, the flames shifted again, burning blue for a single heartbeat, then returning to red. From this moment, he said, "You are no longer a guest. You are of the island." He cupped her chin, raising her face to meet his. "Speak the last name you'll ever wear." She blinked. "What?" He leaned in. The words were for her alone. "What do you want to be called when you stop pretending to be anything else?" Her answer came without thought. Not her birth name, not her byline, not even Elena. She spoke a word she had never said aloud, a name that felt like fire in her throat, one that tasted like power and surrender at once. And when she said it, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't bow. They simply turned and walked away, because she was no longer one of them. She was one of his. Days no longer passed in hours. Time folded inward. She and Damien no longer met in lounges or gardens. Their world existed behind closed doors, in rooms where candles flickered endlessly and truth was the only currency. He told her things about the island, how it had once belonged to men with obsessions they couldn't share with the world, how he had inherited it, not through money, but through mastery. "It's not a place," he told her once, hands wrapped around her waist in the low light of the moon chamber. "It's a mirror. The more you give it, the more it shows you." "And what have you given it?" she asked. He smiled. "Everyone, but even paradise has rules." And one night, she broke one. It happened in the whispering room, where guests were only allowed to speak in truth or not at all. A woman in crimson approached Elena during a gathering. "You don't belong with him," the woman said, voice dry and lilting. "You were chosen because you're new, not because you're worthy." It wasn't jealousy, it was challenge. And Elena, still fierce beneath her surrender, responded. She told a lie. "I never wanted him." The lights went out instantly. The room fell silent. The island rejected the falsehood. She was dragged, not by hands, but by sensation, through the hall, into the cold, into the dark jungle. Her feet never touched the ground, and yet she moved. When she woke, she was alone, in the jungle's heart, stripped of everything except the gold bracelet. And Damien was gone. She stayed there for one night. Two. No food, no warmth, only the sound of the ocean, the wind, and her own pulse reminding her what it felt like to lie. Not to others, but to herself, because she had wanted him, had chosen this, had surrendered not for love, but for truth. It wasn't about him. It had never been about him. He was only the mirror. On the third day, she whispered her real truth aloud. "I belong here," and the island heard. When she returned to the villa, everything had changed. The windows were no longer shuttered. The bed was stripped bare, and Damien was waiting. But he didn't open his arms. He didn't speak. He knelt to her, bowed his head, hands open, because she had passed the final gate. She had lost him, and chosen the island anyway. Chosen herself, and now he could offer her what he never offered anyone else. Everything. They were equals now, not in power, but in purpose, where once he unmade her, now she could create. And so, for the first time, he asked nothing of her. No instruction, no invitation, just a single question. "What do you want?" She didn't answer in words. She reached for him, pulled him to her, and kissed him not as a guest, or a student, or a prize, but as a mirror to his own hunger, his own need, his own loneliness. Because for all his power, Damien Virell had never been chosen for who he was, only for what he could offer. But she saw him, and she wanted him anyway. They didn't leave the villa for a week. The island bent around their silence, their storm, their restoration. What passed between them now wasn't a power dynamic. It was an exchange, a giving and taking without rules, without masks, without expectation. And when the next invitation arrived, this time with her name at the top, it was not from Damien. It was from the island, mistress of the glass pavilion, caretaker of the mirror archive, guide to those who come unmasked. "Welcome, Elena Virell." She smiled, signed a parchment, and burned her old name to ash.